Good morning, fifth grade. Today we are going to continue reading in our Civil War text. We are going to learn about the uniforms and the weapons that each army had, and we're also going to learn about the first official battle of the Civil War. During Play Pause It, we're going to focus on how the armies were outfitted, or what they wore, and what kind of materials they had. So we're going to start with our quick write that says, why do opposing teams wear different colored uniforms? What might happen if both teams wore their dark colors to the same game? Press pause to write down your answer and play when you're ready for the focus question. And we want to know, what is that main idea of the text? Our vocabulary words for today are manufacture, and that is when you make something. Usually it's at a large scale, like in a factory. The second one is ammunition, and ammunition, they're like bullets or shells. It's things you use for your weapon. And the last word is retreat, and that's when one of the sides in war runs away because they're defeated. So they're retreating, they're running away before they get captured by the other side. Go ahead and turn the page. And we want you in your book on pages 24 and 25 for Outfitting Armies. And the first thing we're going to do is read the title, Outfitting Armies, and come up with a how or why question. And we want to know, we already know why the armies were outfitted, like they had to have, clothes and weapons in order to be successful in war. So we want to know, how were the Union and Confederate armies outfitted? So press pause to write down your question and play when you're ready to read. I'm at Win Nations at the top. Follow along to underline the answer to your how or why question, and that will give us a clue about the main idea. When nations go to war, they must make sure factories produce clothing and equipment for their soldiers for as long as the fighting lasts. During the Civil War, factories in the North did just that, producing blue wool uniforms, rifles, pistols, swords, ammunition, and camp equipment, as well as tools to repair these things. All right, so this sentence gives us information about how the North outfitted their armies. They used factories to produce all of the materials that were necessary for war. In the Confederate States, there were fewer factories, so the South soldiers had to make do with homemade uniforms and weapons imported from Europe. When these things wore out or broke, there was little or nothing with which to replace them. And so I underlined this sentence about how the South outfitted their armies. And basically, if you were a soldier for the Confederacy, you were responsible for making your own uniform and buying your own weapon. Nothing was given to you like it was in the Union Army. All right, so now that we have finished reading our paragraph, we want to combine these answers into one main idea. And so I would write down in box 1, Northern states used factories to produce everything that the Union soldiers would need, while Southern states had to rely on homemade uniforms and imported weapons. Press pause to write down your answer and play when you're ready for number 2. It says, what effect did factories have on the Northern states' preparation for war? And if I go back in the text where it tells me that they're preparing for war in the factories, I'm looking for this effect that says producing blue wool uniforms, rifles, pistols, swords, ammunition, and camp equipment, as well as the tools to repair these things. So the effect that the factories had on the Northern states' preparation is that the Northern states, the factories, I would write this down in box 2, the factories in Northern states were able to manufacture all the materials soldiers would need for war. As a result, the soldiers were prepared for war, and their materials could be replaced. Press pause to write down your answer and play when you're ready for the second part of box 2. It says, how did the lack of factories affect the southern states' preparation for war? And if we go back in the text, it tells us how they had fewer factories, which means they lacked factories. And the soldiers had to make their own uniforms and buy weapons from Europe. And so, and then if they broke, they could not replace them. So I'm thinking about how this sounds like they were less prepared for war. Let's go to the second part of box 2, and we would write, because the southern states did not have factories, they had to make their uniforms at home and buy weapons at Europe. As a result, the Confederate soldiers could not replace their uniforms and weapons very easily. Press pause to write down your answer and play when you're ready for number 3. For number 3, we're going to go to page 25, and we are going to compare, we're going to kind of look at the Union uniform and the Southern uniform, and then we're going to compare the two in box 4. So for the Union uniform, it says, this Union private is outfitted in a machine-made uniform with a complete set of accessories and a new rifle. And he has a sword bayonet, he has a wool uniform to keep him warm, he's got brass buttons, a blanket, and a knapsack. He has a rifle and leather leggings that will keep him dry. All right, so in box 3 it says describe the Union uniform. And we would say in box 3, the Union uniform is made out of blue wool, and the Union soldiers carry a rifle, knapsack, and blanket. Press pause to write down your answer and play when you're ready for the Southern volunteer. It says, Confederate soldiers were supposed to wear uniforms made of gray wool. But as the war went on, very few Southern volunteers could assemble a complete gray wool suit. Many wore a uniform made of homespun cloth colored light brown with a dye made from crushed butternuts. This type of uniform was so common that butternut became a common nickname for a Southern soldier. And then we see that the Southern soldier is, he has a hat that he's wearing. He also has a bayonet. He has a wool short jacket and an outdated musket. So his weapon is actually older than the Union one. All right, let's go to the second part of box 3. It says, I would write down the Confederate soldiers were supposed to wear gray uniforms, but most uniforms were a light brown color. They also carried outdated muskets. Press pause to write down your answer and play when you're ready for number 4. It says, how are the uniforms of the soldiers similar? Well, we see that both soldiers have weapons. The uniforms are made of wool, and they both have hats. So I would write down in the first part of box 4, both soldiers have weapons, uniforms made of wool, and hats. Press pause to write down your answer and play when you're ready for the second part of box 4. How are the uniforms of the soldiers different? Well, I know that the Union soldiers' uniform is factory made, and the Southern uniform is homemade. I also see that the Union soldier has a knapsack and a blanket, and the Confederate soldier does not. In addition, the Confederate soldier has an outdated weapon. All right, so in the second part of box 4, I would write, the Union soldiers wore factory-made blue uniforms, and had more updated weapons. They also had a knapsack and a blanket. The Confederate uniforms are light brown and homemade. They also carry outdated weapons. Press pause to write down your answer and play when you're ready for the paragraph. It says, what are the differences and similarities in the Union and Confederate uniforms? So you could use box 4 as your topic sentence for your paragraph, and your quotes could come from box 2 or box 3.